This is Billy Ball, managing editor at Cardinal Pine, based out of North Carolina. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined today by Dr. T. Anthony Spearman. Dr. Spearman is a longtime civil rights leader in North Carolina. He's an ordained minister with the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. He has been serving in the pastor role at St. Philip's AME Zion Church in Greensboro since 2014. Dr. Spearman is also the president of North Carolina's NAACP, and he has spoken on a great many issues in this state and was a foundational leader with the NAACP during the historic Thousands on Jones Street movement, and also with the Moral Monday movement, which had national headlines in North Carolina. So Dr. Spearman is joining us today under some very sad circumstances. Obviously, everyone's been following the news out of Georgia and the shooting with Mr. Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old who was shot dead in the street there a couple of months ago. So there's a lot of outrage right now, and we wanted to make sure that people had some time for some conversations and to say the things that a lot of people are thinking right now as they look at that horrific video. So again, Dr. Spearman, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Billy. Thanks for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. And this Ahmaud Arbery situation is one that's very, very difficult, one that's very troubling. And certainly one that I have been kind of living out for the length of my days, for as far back as the early the mid 1900s, and I was born in 1951, and I can recall one of the horrific deaths back then. In I think about 1958 or so, the death of Emmett Till, a young man who was 14 years old, and of course, a horrific death ensued. And actually this morning, when you called me, Billy, I was actually listening to a hearing, the hearing of the Fourth Circuit Court, and the hearing was it was an en banc hearing. All of the judges were there for one Ronnie Long, who has been incarcerated for 44 years. And we believe that evidence has surfaced that proves that he was innocent. And as I think about those things and think about this Ahmaud Arbery death, it just helps me to keep in perspective how lives of African Americans, people of color, don't seem to amount to much in these United States of America. As I viewed the horrific video of the young man who appeared to be jogging on a country road and to have been interrupted in his jog of the day, or I don't know what it may have been, but by two men who seemed to have been in the wings waiting to ambush him. It just grieves my heart, grieves my spirit. And I pray for the day and long for the day that things would become different, but I'm not sure that we're going to see that in my lifetime. And that's what makes it so sad, because for as long as I can remember, these episodes have recurred. They continue to surface. They come back again and again and again. And down in Georgia, I'm also mindful that, it was only a few years ago that a number of our children went missing in Atlanta, Georgia. And although they claim that the young man Wendell Williams was the one that has done it, where, you know, it's not conclusive. The jury is still out on that. And I think they're moving in the right direction to have a hearing by a grand jury on this one. I believe that's the right thing to do, based on the fact that the first two district attorneys that heard it or took a look at it, of course, knew the father and son team who killed the young man, and now this person, I suppose, has no idea of who it was and or who they were, and at least is moving in the direction where I believe justice will be served. I'm going back and forth because as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about the hearing this morning, where 44 years after the fact, some of the justices on the bench seem to want to still refer back to the 44 years ago when the case of Ronnie Long took place, and to take a position that, you know, a seemingly immovable situation or position, that Ronnie was found guilty then, and it needs to stand now, 44 years later, despite the fact that they found evidence, exculpatory evidence that proves that this more than likely was not the man. And from the video footage, it just seems as if we're dealing with another case of an innocent young man who, because of the color of his skin, suffered a wrong that cannot be reversed. His life is gone. And too oftentimes, the lives of our young men are being snuffed out wrongfully. Justice is not being served constantly. And where is it all going to end seems to be the lingering question.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Spearman, what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm stating this incorrectly, but it seems as if you believe we shouldn't be viewing this shooting in Georgia as an isolated event. Obviously, we have seen these types of shootings involving race, and specifically involving Black men being shot wrongfully in other states. We've seen them in North Carolina back in 2016. I'm sure everyone remembers the protests out there in Charlotte over Keith Scott's shooting. You know,
Right.
how do we convince people to view these events as part of a systemic issue and not as just an isolated tragedy somewhere far down the road?
That, Billy, is something that I'm hopeful and prayerful and continuing to research out, in hopes that we will be able to do that very thing, to help people to look at these incidents from a historical point of view. And right now, I'm thinking about a volume, 13-volume text that I became aware of a couple of years ago, stumbled upon, and it actually cost me $600, but it was well worth it. It is some 13 text chronicles of a Ku Klux Klan conspiracy dating back to 1872. And there were congressional hearings that interviewed people who had interactions with the Ku Klux Klan back then. I was at a rally in Hillsborough this past summer, and I spoke on some of the things that are rising up again, the Ku Klux Klan surfacing in Hillsborough. And a young man after that meeting heard me say some things and make reference to that 13-volume text, and said to me, it would be wonderful, I think, if we could find a way to get those 13 volumes into the curriculum of the public schools in North Carolina to help people to see. I mean, there are volumes that are written about these very same kinds of horrific events that have been taking place for hundreds of years. And people want to, they want to kind of see, think that these things are happening in isolation, that they're not happening intentionally, that there are conspiracies that are intended and developed coming out of these things. I mean, to see the video of Ahmaud and the father standing on the bed of the truck, while his son is tangling with Ahmaud, who was trying to get out of their sphere, trying to move away from them, but they apprehended him anyway, and it appears that he was shot close range by the son, and the father kind of shoots as well. It's like, well, what is going on with this? A citizen's arrest, they claim. So they had already perpetrated to do what it was that they were going to do. That's clear to me, clear enough to me, because it happens over and over and over and over again, especially in the South, in the southern states. It happens over and over again. And I can't help but to think of the creed, I'll call it, of the Roger B. Taney court back in the 1830s. I think it was, maybe he was the chief judge of the Supreme Court from 1830s to the 1860s. And the creed basically that came out of the Dred Scott decision was that a black man has no rights that a white man has to abide by. That seems to still be the creed today, Billy. And it's a sad, sad occasion when because of the color of my skin, I cannot be considered to be as much of a man, as you are. It just boggles my mind how we have these standards in this land of the free, this home of the brave, so-called, but yet I have to live a substandard life. Mm-hmm. It's just sad. Mm-hmm. So I think us continuing to anchor arguments in history is probably going to be, if we consistently do that, I think that's going to be the best thing for us. That's going to help us to be able to help people to understand better what we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And I know what you're saying. I think there are a lot of people in North Carolina who don't know our own history with regard to members of the legislature long ago who were involved in some ways with the Ku Klux Klan, who don't know the history with the Wilmington Riots. There was a book that came out last year along these lines that I think a lot of people who've grown up in this state, I grew up in this state, a lot of people just simply didn't know how incredibly deep and tormented this history is.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Mm-hmm. And I'm hopeful that we will get on the track that we need to get on. But I think a part of that is going to also be intricately related to who is presently in office. I mean, who are elected officials. We have to take a look at those dynamics as we move forward. And I just hope and pray that we're able to get to some sense of balance, strike some balance in the state of North Carolina. Of course, gerrymandering has done its job on us. Redistricting has done a job on us and caused a great deal of imbalance to occur. And for the most part, you've got a conservative, and I have to go a step further and say that you've got an extreme group of people who do not want to understand the plight of the African American, first and foremost. And so that when that bias plays out, we have a even more difficult time of being able to get to where I believe we need to be.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Spearman, one more question, and I'll let you go. Thank you again for taking the time to talk with us today. You know, what do you say to people who are looking at what happened down in Georgia, or who are looking at what happened out in the Charlotte area in 2016, or in any number of American states where we've seen these shootings occur in the past? What do you say to people who say, you know, I just have outrage fatigue? You know, how do I continue to process these events and do it in a way that is productive?
Yeah. Well, it certainly becomes more and more difficult as time goes on. There was a term, I think, back in the 70s that was coined, and it's called microaggression. And I think that is something that African Americans face on a daily basis. Sometimes in some areas, when we walk out of the door, we feel those senses where a microaggression, where our lives just don't seem to matter. I think that we just have to continue to be as steadfast as we can. We have to continue to be as courageous as we possibly can. Have to continue finding and identifying allies, because allies are so very important to the movement that we are part of. And as we continue to, plant our feet and move forward in the path that we have to move forward in, we just have to trust that soon and very soon something will be done about these egregious wrongs that are levied on people of color.
Thank you again, Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, a longtime civil rights leader in North Carolina, president of North Carolina's NAACP. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.